What's up guys, JayzTwoCents here, and I'm gonna kick off my Ryzen 2nd generation coverage with some overclocking, a little bit of a guide, more or less taking you guys along for the ride, because we got some new features here with Ryzen 2nd gen I wanna kinda test out. We've obviously got some faster speeds, especially with the 2700X. I wanna see whether or not these faster speeds have reduced the amount of overclocking headroom we have, or if we can still maximize even more potential out of these CPUs. So today we're gonna test all of this. We're gonna test some cooling, we're gonna see how this thing does in Cinebench, and then, yeah, I guess we're just gonna kind of see what happens. We're gonna take you guys along for that ride. Today's video is sponsored by Squarespace, and whether you need a domain, a website, or an online store, make it with Squarespace. Easy to use templates make creating an online identity even easier and doesn't require any coding or programming. And with its all-in-one platform, you never need to install, patch, or upgrade anything. Need a domain too? Well, Squarespace has you covered there with their hassle-free domain transfer, registration, and management. Squarespace empowers millions of websites across thousands of different industries for people just like you. So get started today by heading to squarespace.com and starting your free trial. And when you're ready to launch, go to squarespace.com/JayzTwoCents and save 10% off your purchase of a website or a domain. Now, before we get started here, let's talk about the hardware we're using. We're using a 2700X. We are using an ASUS Crosshair 7 Hero motherboard, which is obviously an X470 chipset. We need, even though these chips could be installed on X370, we need X470 to take full advantage of some of the features we want to try out today. For cooling, we're running a Celsius S36 from Fractal Design. It's got three 120mm fans. It's PWM controlled, so we can control the speed pretty easily. It integrates seamlessly with the motherboard. And we're running 16 gigabytes of G.Skill Sniper X memory, which is again Ryzen optimized, and it's rated at 3400 megahertz. I believe CL15 is as tight as the timing can go, but we're gonna play around with a little bit of that as well. Some of the other things I want to test out is Ryzen first generation was extremely dependent on memory speed, where quite often there was more of a performance gain to be had by overclocking your memory as fast as possible rather than touching the core speed at all. In fact, I believe Gamers Nexus did a very in-depth video showing leaving the core speed where it was and increasing the memory speed was a direct benefit to the Infinity Fabric, which showed more gains in performance and results both in gaming as well as synthetic benchmarks and even real-world tasks like Adobe and Blender and stuff like that, than touching the core clock. But AMD Ryzen 2nd gen talks about more efficiency and better latency when it comes to memory interacting with the CPU, so that may not be as much of the case this time. So that's something that I definitely want to check. Now, the reason why I'm using Cinebench R15 is because it's free, it's consistent, and it's something that you guys can download on your own and actually share your results. So if you want to follow along, download Cinebench R15. Doesn't matter what hardware you're using, just download it, run your test, and in the comments below, I want you guys put in there your system specs and what your score was. That way we can all see exactly how we're kind of comparing to one another, especially if you're considering getting Ryzen 2nd gen and you're currently on 1st gen. Share those figures so that you can see whether or not it's even worth upgrading from 1st gen or not. So with that said, let's go ahead and start tinkering. Now I've got Ryzen Master open here, but I'm gonna be using the ASUS BIOS to actually do all of my overclocking. I'm kind of old school in that I don't like using software that's built into the OS to do my overclocking. I want it to happen at the ground level of everything that's happening with the system. But the reason why I've even got Ryzen Master open is for two reasons. One, I want to check out the temperatures, and two, I want to see what's happening with the core clock. So you can see here, they're all kind of bouncing around. On the 1800X, you would have one core that would jump up to 4 gigahertz and the rest would stay at about 3600 megahertz under load. And that's because it wasn't overclocking all of the cores. But what's happening now with the new algorithm here is it's actually smoothing out those cores, where instead of having one that's pegged and the rest kind of running at their base clock, you're running more of them closer to the turbo clock based on things like power draw headroom as well as temperature headroom. So it's all on its own without us touching anything. Is already dynamically adjusting itself to try and get the most performance out of it. Now there's other features built into motherboards that can handle this, that can do it automatically. So if you're doing overclocking, you wanna make sure that those are turned off as well. But it's important to note that we are sitting exactly in the factory settings that are coming from BIOS. I don't believe the core enhancement's turned on, but we'll take a look at that when we get into the BIOS. But I just wanted to sort of show this right here, where it's gonna jump all around between 4.1 and 4.3, depending on the type of load that we're under and how much power is being drawn. So let's go and do our base run here. I'm gonna do two runs, one with the Ryzen Master open to see temperatures, and then I'm gonna close it because Ryzen Master does give a little bit of a hit to performance. So we got the test running in the background. You can see we're sitting at 46C, 47, 48, 48 and a half. Looks like we're gonna sit right about 48.5C, which is obviously giving us tons of temperature headroom. We don't even have these fans running max yet. If we take a look at our score here, as soon as this is done, we got a 1,617, and again, that was with Ryzen Master open. So I'm gonna close this now, and I'm gonna go ahead and run this one more time to see if there's any improvement. Okay, so it jumped up a little bit to 1628. Not a great score, not a terrible score, but considering everything is factory, nothing has been touched, that's actually pretty good. And our temperatures are actually doing really well as well. It's also important to note, I should have said this earlier, make sure your desktop performance mode is set to high performance. You're running all the latest BIOS, all the latest drivers, which of course we are. So that's important to note. So yes, we're gonna save this result, and now we're gonna go ahead and reboot into BIOS. So here's what our base settings look like. We've got a frequency of 3700 megahertz because that's the base clock on this one. Our temps are sitting at about 34. Not bad considering BIOS puts a small load on. Base clock 100, that's normal. Core voltage is actually pretty high. I'm surprised they put this much voltage to it factory. 1.462, that's a lot of volts. And then our ratio's 37. So the reason why you get that clock is it's a base clock times the ratio gives you that number. So 100 times 37 or 3700. As you can see, our memory is at 2133, voltage at 1.2, and then our capacity is 16 gigabytes. So we're gonna go over here to the extreme tweaker, and no, that's not because it's legal in California now, that's just what they're calling it. AI overclock tuner, we're gonna set to manual. That means we don't want it doing anything for us. You can see there's all these different preset overclocks, auto, default, manual. We're just gonna set it to manual because we want control of everything. And we're gonna leave it in synchronous mode. This is something kind of new. We have an asynchronous mode and a synchronous mode. For the sake of simplicity, we're gonna keep it in synchronous. We're gonna sync everything, and we're gonna leave our B clock frequency at 100. Could have left it at auto, but I just like to type it in. Performance enhancer, we're gonna leave that at auto. Actually, we'll set it to default. I don't know exactly what it's gonna increase. It says right here, maintain boost frequencies longer, resulting in higher performance. Level 3 and 4 overclock settings, which might not work with all CPUs. So again, we don't want any automated overclocking. We want to control this. Now our CPU core ratio, I'm gonna set this to 40. We're gonna go straight to 4 gigahertz. I don't think we're gonna have any problems running that. Our performance bias set to auto, set to none. We don't wanna have any Cinebench 15 automatic, overclocking help in there. Memory frequency, we're gonna leave the memory. Like I said, I wanna test and see what happens if we overclock frequency for CPU or overclock frequency for memory, and then do the two together and see if anything can be combined for our best results. So I'm testing to see if we're seeing good improvements without touching memory first. Core performance boost, set to auto. I guess that automatically overclocks the CPU and DRAM to enhance system performance. We're gonna disable that because we don't want it doing that for us, as I've said a bunch of times. We're gonna leave our voltage where it's at. I feel it's kind of high, but I wanna see what auto voltage does. If we go too high on volts, then it might reduce our clocks because again, it's looking for things like temperature and power draw. If it draws too much power, then we're gonna have a problem. Okay, so we jumped up to 1769. So I'm gonna go ahead and save this. I'm gonna open Ryzen Master. We're gonna do it again because I wanna see what the cores are doing and I wanna see what our temperature is doing. So I'm gonna start the test. And with Ryzen Master open, you can see everything is just sitting at 4 gigahertz. Our temperatures rose a couple of degrees. We're sitting at 50.25 C. So obviously we still have a lot of overclocking headroom. But look at our core voltage. Under load, it dropped down to 1.30. And I assume that's gonna be because of line load calibration. So what we're gonna do now is just keep incrementally increasing our multiplier until we get a crash at stock voltage. If we get a crash at stock voltage, then what we'll do is we'll try playing with the voltage a little bit to see exactly where we can get it to kind of come back to life without pumping too much voltage in it, because then the temperatures will just climb exponentially. We'll go to 41, all cores, and do it again. 4.1 passed, our score jumped up to 1803, and our voltage jumped up to 1.35, which meant our temperature came up a little bit higher as well. Our max temp hit about 56 C. So we saw about 6 Celsius of increased temperature just by going from 1.3 to 1.35. Again, the voltage is auto and we just passed 4.1. So I'm gonna keep going and see where we crash. So here we are running 4.2 and it went immediately to 1.45. So auto voltage is obviously starting to add a lot of voltage. So we definitely wanna keep an eye on temperatures. Our temperatures also shot up to about 62 C and our score came up to 1829. Again, that's with Ryzen Master running. But see, with our test going right now, our temp came up to 62, 63, 63.75, 64. So it's definitely getting warm. Now the air coming through the radiator is not hot at all. This is just the amount of heat that's immediately inside that process just because of the amount of voltage that we're pumping to it. The fact that it even stops right there shows that our AIO is definitely doing a good job. When I tried this with the Prism cooler, it immediately went up to ADC, which started to deal with throttling. So that's something we don't want. But as you can see, the score is doing great, 1835. And I'm gonna run it again here with Ryzen Master closed so I can see if that score improves at all. One thing I want to point out too is I have all the air that's coming through the radiator, which is actually still very cool, blowing directly on the VRM and the memory. So it's blowing onto the motherboard. Normally in an open environment like this, you don't have proper airflow over the motherboard, and we certainly do. So look at that, it came up to 1860. We gained almost 30 points right there by shutting down Ryzen Master. So when you're doing your tests and stuff, run it once with it open to check your voltages and your temperatures, and then close it and run your test again, and you see you can improve quite a bit. So here we are, 4.3 gigahertz. It went to 1.5 volts immediately, which shot us to about 71 or 72 C at max load. So you can see we are starting to get to the point to where even an AIO like this is not gonna be able to transfer heat fast enough because it's so focused inside that 12 nanometer process. But our score jumped up to an 1887, once again, with Ryzen Master open. So I'm gonna run this one more time with it closed and see if we get another jump. Over 1900 on this would be amazing. And remember, we haven't even touched memory yet. I could not get my 1800X anywhere near this. And we are running 4.3, yeah, 1902. 1902 with it, with Ryzen Master off. That's insane. So I'm not feeling too confident though that 4.4 is going to pass or make it past Cinebench. I have a feeling it will make it into the operating system, no problem. But I'm not feeling confident that we're gonna actually get a 4.4 all-core overclock to complete a Cinebench run. But, well, so far it's only still showing 1.5 volts, but we are running 4.4 all the way across. Is the test gonna even go? Nope, it immediately crashed. System lock right there. I'm not gonna give it any more voltage. So I'm gonna say 4.3 on a very brute force, non-surgical method of overclocking by just increasing our multiplier is gonna be where we are gonna call it a day, at least on the CPU. So now we need to put everything back to factory and overclock our RAM and see if anything is improved. So I'm gonna actually put this back to 4.3 and we're gonna save this, right? Because we don't wanna have to go through all over again. So profile name is 43, we're gonna save it to profile 1. There we go, so we can call these settings back up later. Optimize defaults, restart our BIOS. We're gonna leave everything on auto again, and then we're gonna overclock our RAM to the rated speed of this, which is 3400 megahertz. So with everything on factory, we're gonna go to AI Overclock Tuner because this is where we can actually load up our memory speeds right here. So if you see now, it wants to go to DDR4 3401, 16, 16, 16, 36, yes, at 1.35 volts. So that's our memory overclock. Remember, all DDR4 runs at 2133 unless you go in and overclock it, and the rated speed of the memory is actually an overclock on top of what the base DDR4 is. So if you forgot that, remember, if you've put memory in your system and just left it, you're probably not running at max speed. So you can go in there and check that. So here we are running at 3400 megahertz. 1628 was what we ran at the 3.7 gigahertz all stock clock before. And there probably will be a little bit of an improvement here. The question is gonna be how much? How much? Whoa, it jumped all the way to 1819 immediately. So we went from a 1628 to an 1819, like just like that. The question is now, can we run the core speeds that we were seeing with the memory speed being overclocked as well? One thing that kind of sucks is it accidentally removed my original score, which was a 1669, I think it was. But what I want to check right here is I want to see exactly what's happening with the cores. Because remember I talked about that Sense MI where it's going to dynamically adjust its own core speed and stuff. I have a feeling we're getting faster core speeds anyway. So I'm testing that right now at the 3600. And no, our cores are down to 4025, which was exactly what they were when I showed you guys on the first test. So that's not something that is taken into account right here. I'm gonna go ahead and stop this test because I don't want to save that one. So we jumped up to 1840 at 3600 memory. So now we're just gonna keep bumping up the memory like we did with CPU and see how far we can get. 3800's boot looping. Yep, memory settings have been reset due to failure. All right, so 3600 it is. I'm not gonna be adding any more voltage to the memory. So what we're gonna do now is we are going to go ahead and just reboot at 3600 and we're gonna start adding more voltage. So I'm gonna go straight to 4.1 because we know it's already running at 4.025. So I'm gonna try going straight to 4.1. Memory clock is running at 1800, so that is 36. Works for me, but our temperatures, look at that, came back down to 24. Our previous 4.1, look at that, 1866. So we already gained 26 points by overclocking at 75 megahertz. 75 megahertz with that memory speed. So remember, we were running 4.025 on the original test. 75 megahertz just gave us 26 points. But remember, the higher we go with the core clock, the more stress we put on that memory controller, like I was just saying. So, interesting. We might have to drop it back to 3400. Then the question is, if we're at 3400 and 4200 megahertz on the CPU, is that gonna balance out, or do we still get our max performance with stock memory at 4.3? I'm gonna try applying, I don't really recommend this, but I'm gonna try applying just a tiny bit more memory voltage. 1.36, let's try that. See if that helps a little bit. So it is 1800 and we're running at 4.2. Perfect, let's do this. So our last test was an 1866. We've got to beat an 1866. 1900. We are 2 points behind where we were with overclocking just the CPU, but we are a significant less voltage as well and less heat. All right, so we're gonna try 4.3 again at the 3600 megahertz. This is where we just failed, but we added a little bit more voltage to the memory. But what I find really kind of interesting is the fact that we got this huge initial jump by going to the faster RAM, but then as we overclocked our CPU, after that, we got very small jumps to where now even with fast RAM and the CPU clock at nearly where it was before, we were at just the same number. Only a difference of 2, but it looks like we're gonna actually pass this test. 1933. I know I can't do 4.4. I wasn't able to get 4.4 with just the CPU and without overclocking the memory. And even by putting more voltage into the memory, we couldn't boot 3800. So this is where getting our hands on some 4000 megahertz memory would probably be fun, and maybe we'll revisit that. But if you look right here on the left, you can see our intervals of the way things were kind of leapfrogging along the way. But obviously our single biggest jump was running our rated memory speed. And Ryzen still takes huge advantage of it, but it seems like obviously doing a mixture of CPU and memory gave us the best results at 1933. So yeah, this obviously isn't a complete stability test. We need to run all sorts of different tests to make sure that we're fully stable, but at least right now we're stable for Cinebench R15. Guys, thanks for coming along today. I'll probably do this with some of the lower end CPUs as well, but I just wanted to kind of see what kind of potential we had with Ryzen 2 on its new 12 nanometer process. And you know, if this isn't the kind of thing you want to tinker with, you could leave the core enhancement and the SenseMI features turned on, and then just go in, turn on either, it's going to be called XMP or DOCP memory, flip that one switch, and you see that you can get a huge improvement. All right, guys, I'm gonna go. If you've got any other suggestions of things you'd like to see with Ryzen 2nd generation, let me know, and I will try my best to do those tests. But as always, guys, your views are appreciated around here. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you in the next one.